let's talk about supply chain management for this new slate of products. Is Apple going to be able to get all of these new iPhones and watches and AirPods to people who want them in time for the holidays?
I mean, as far as getting it in time for the holidays, yes, we think so. I think it's interesting that clearly the timing of this event clearly being on September 7th and the actual launch of the phones, right? I mean, you were talking September 16th, I believe, is when shipments start, pretty much a week earlier than we had previously anticipated, to be honest with you. I think that in itself should tell you that they're absolutely managing the supply constraints that, maybe they had to contend with more severely earlier this year in a much better situation. So they should be better positioned here over the next couple of months than others out there. Now, I will say this, as far as these phones are concerned, I mean, it is more supply driven than demand driven in terms of expectations for the September quarter. We do expect them to be supply constrained to some extent here over the next couple of weeks. And I think it's really interesting with how they kind of put the launch of these phones, right? So we have the four devices will be available at the end of next week, where the other one will be in October. So that'll help them also better navigate the constraints and put more emphasis on those Pro devices, which of course are higher priced and better margin.
So interestingly, when you look at the Apple website and the shipping times, a lot of those times have come down, which is sort of our gauge of, how much trouble are they having, making all of these products and getting them to customers. The iPhone, Mac, iPad, all pretty much coming, when you want them to come. What are the biggest pain points going to be, though, over the next few months? I mean, we've seen various chip companies continuing to struggle as we look at their earnings. What is it about Apple that they're not having these issues?
Yeah, so I'd say as far as, I'd say they're in much better position than others out there. And the biggest reason is, they are the largest kind of, purchaser of semiconductor goods out there on kind of a pure play basis, right? I mean, if you take out Samsung, which kind of, utilizes kind of their own their own smartphone demand to kind of feed their own business, that's not necessarily the case here with Apple. Apple kind of outsources all their semiconductor needs out there. So they have significant needs out there. And because of that, they definitely get they're first in line in order to kind of get those goods. At the end of the day, though, when we kind of look ahead here in terms of where the supply constraints continue to be most severe, it's definitely at the more trailing edge technology nodes. It's more your kind of, your microprocessors, your microcontrollers and what have you of the world. And Apple does need to purchase those type of components. But again, they are in better position than others out there to get those orders fulfilled.
Obviously, we know how interconnected Apple's supply chain is with China. They've been trying to diversify that, and it likely won't be so intertwined in years to come, but that's still the case for now. How will rising global tension impact Apple? How will the CHIPS Act come into play?
So, I think longer term, clearly Apple does want to further diversify its supply chain, and they clearly are looking to do so. We think kind of their emphasis is absolutely going to be more so in India than other regions of the world, rightfully so, because when you actually think about where the demand upside could potentially come from Apple here over the next decade, I think India is a big reason if you are a bull on Apple, just from the natural wealth effect that will take place in India over the next 10, 20 years. So it makes a lot of sense for Apple to start kind of expanding into that geographic region. But that being said, Apple remains very well positioned within China. We don't necessarily actually expect them to, shut down any type of production out there. And to be honest with you, as more and more chip companies out there kind of evolve within China, there's actually a possibility where Apple could potentially use their local semiconductor manufacturing industry as well. But that being said, I mean, we do expect them to continue to look for ways to expand and further diversify outside of China. But India will be the key there. I don't know how much of an impact kind of the CHIPS Act will have within the U.S., but I think only time will tell.
The big question remains how many people are going to upgrade their devices in the middle of a downturn when they're already paying more for everything else. how significant do you think the pricing that we heard today, the Apple Watch Ultra at $799, the new iPhone 14 at $799, the same price it was last year as the iPhone 13, that seems to be pretty significant.
Yes, I mean, listen, I actually thought there was a possibility they could have raised the prices on some of those Pro devices, but I'm kind of happy that they didn't, to be honest with you. When we kind of look at Apple here, first off, our forecast for the upcoming cycle here in terms of the iPhone 14 cycle is actually no growth in terms of on the unit side of things. However, we do expect average selling prices to increase about 3%, at least 3%, and that's going to just be the actual improving mix. I mean, clearly they're ditching the mini out there, adding the 6.7-inch plus device, and then just what they've announced on the Pro side of things relative to what they've done with the two standard devices. I think there's a big enough gap where you could potentially see more consumers kind of gravitate out there more towards the Pro devices, at least for the September quarter and December quarter. We remain very optimistic in terms of units. We're about 2 to 3% above the street. We do get a little bit more concerned on the macro side of things as we go into the March and June quarters and the cycle extends.